Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Talking Cardboard. My name is Cory, and this is the episode that kicks it all off. My favorite time of year. Typically each year in January, February, I kick off the year talking about my favorite board games of all time. More specifically, my top 50 favorite board games of all time. In today's list, I'm going through games number 50 up to 41. Let's get started. Okay, so here we are, games number 50 up to 41. In this video, I'm going to be running through each game fairly quickly so the length of the video isn't too long, and as we get closer and closer to my top 10 games of all time, I'll spend a little bit more time talking about each game when we get to that point. But let's start with game number 50, which is brand new to my list this year, and it is a big one. Dune, War for Arrakis. Dune, War for Arrakis is one of my favorite miniatures on a map style game. Traditionally, these games are played 1 versus 1. You can play Dune, War for Arrakis as 2 versus 2, but I do prefer it as that 1v1 head-to-head battle, where one player is taking on the role of Paul Atreides in the Fremen clan, and the other player is taking on the role of House Harkonnen, going head-to-head. What I really like in Dune, War for Arrakis is it's not really like any other miniatures on a map style game traditionally, where typically you're just going head-to-head, trying to take down the opponent's figures and trying to roll some dice, do some combat, and see who wins. This game definitely has a lot more going on with it, with more asymmetry and variable win conditions. Paul Atreides and the Fremen have unique missions that they're trying to complete each round. There are random missions that are flipped up at the beginning of each round, and you're trying to complete those missions in various ways. So there's a lot of variability with trying to move around the map and position yourself in different ways to go after these unique missions to try to score points that way, whereas House Harkonnen player is trying to go after more of like the base camps of the Fremen and trying to take those down. You don't know how valuable each base is. Each base is hidden on the map, not knowing how valuable it is. So when you get to a base and discover it, you flip over the token, and then that shows how valuable that is to take that camp down. So it's cool that yes, House Harkonnen is more geared toward kind of powering into your opponent and taking them down and trying to kill your opponent's figures, but you're also trying to take over those camps for points to try to get your point track up to the top to win the game. So Dune, War for Arrakis is definitely one of my top favorite figures on a map style game. Okay, my number 49 game was number 38 last year, so falling just a little bit. We don't get this game to the table as often as we used to, but a great game nonetheless, and that is Stockpile. Stockpile is one of my favorite stock-driven style games where you've got hidden information involved in the game as well. Granted a special ability that none of your opponents have to either look at cards secretively, knowing which stocks are going to rise or fall, and various other powers that are unique to each and every player. In Stockpile, you are essentially grabbing stocks to your hand, deciding which piles to place them in down in the center of the main table. Some of them have to be placed face down, some of the cards are placed face up, and then after that, you and your opponents are bidding over which pile you wish to receive. And whoever bids the highest for each pile then pays that amount of money, gains that stockpile to their common supply, and then those are the stocks and or the booms or the busts or the different variables that you are stuck with for the rest of the game. And as the game suggests, it is a stock-driven game where stocks are going to be going up in value, going down in value. Some of them are going to bust or split depending on how poorly or how well the stock is doing. And you are really trying to navigate that with your hidden information and which piles you are bidding for to gain those stocks to your hand, and then buying and selling the stocks at the correct time to gain the most amount of money, and the player with the most money at the end of the game wins. It doesn't fall flat. Every group I've played with family, friends, gamer groups, non-gamers, this game has really shined in every different setting. All right, my number 48 game was number 39 last year, so just falling a little bit down the ranks. I did want to mention that there are 8 brand new games to my top 50 list this year, so that is definitely a large percentage of my top 50 games. 8 of them are brand new to the list, either games that were slightly off my list last year that have climbed the ranks, or just brand new games in general. So some of those new games are pushing these other games down the rank a little bit. So number 48 for me is one of my favorite cooperative board games of all time, and that is Horrified. Horrified has the classic universal monsters. It's themed around that. On the back of the box here, you'll see a board of the town, and you are essentially trying to work together to take down different monsters. Whether it be Dracula or Frankenstein and his bride, or the creature from the Black Lagoon, the Invisible Man or the Wolf Man, all the classic monsters are in this game. And what makes this game so much fun is that it's very simple to teach and play. You're essentially just moving around the map trying to collect items to then turn in those items at different locations to try to defeat the monsters. But what makes Horrified really fun and unique is that each of the monsters has a different win condition to take it down. So each monster has a variable, like a different puzzle that you're trying to solve to defeat that monster. And that's what keeps Horrified fresh and really fun to play each and every time. You can really tailor the difficulty in this game to either be more or less difficult depending on how well your previous games have gone or the group of gamers that you're playing with. If they're, you have a group that's a little bit newer to gaming, you can kind of make it a little bit easier by playing maybe against 2 monsters. But if you are becoming more comfortable with the game, you can start the game trying to defeat 3 or even 4 monsters to make it even more difficult. Horrified plays in a quick time frame as well, and is just a lot of fun to work together and a great cooperative game. Okay, and now for my game number 47. 47 was number 23 last year, so has really dropped quite a bit, has dropped 24 places, and this is just because it doesn't hit the table as often as I would like it to. I actually have the box here for one of the expansions that I'm showing because the game is a massive game, kind of like the same style box over here as Dune War for Arrakis. So just going to show the expansion to the Black Powder expansion for the Great Wall. The Great Wall, like I said, I would love to get it to the table a lot more often, but it just doesn't hit the table as much. It is a more complex game to play and kind of wrap your head around, and that kind of keeps it off the table a little bit more than I'd like to see it. But if you have a game group that has played it a couple times and you're bringing it back to the table with the same game group, it should come back to you fairly quickly. But it is kind of a large rule set to kind of remember, but in the Great Wall, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of a semi-cooperative game. It's not really cooperative. You are trying to win the game and get the most points, to defeat your opponents, but you're doing so by trying to take down the invaders that are coming at the Great Wall. In the Great Wall, this game is a worker placement style game where you're sending your troops to different locations to gather materials, gather more troops, trying to put troops up onto the wall to defend the wall as the hordes of monsters are coming in to try to take it down. And what's really unique about the Great Wall in the style of worker placement that it has is that when you send a worker to a location, it doesn't automatically trigger giving you that action immediately. You have to wait for that entire worker placement location to fill up with all of the troops, whether it's your troops or yours and your opponent's troops, filling up each spot at that location. And as soon as that location is filled up, then it triggers and you get to do your actions. If you do fill up a location with all of your own troops and nobody else contributed to that spot, you get some shame tokens that are worth negative points at the end of the game. So you kind of want to ask for help around the table from your opponents, ironically enough, to try to gain actions at different locations without gaining those shame tokens. But it's really cool how that balance plays into everything, how there's kind of that push-pull or somewhat of a negotiation when you're trying to figure out which spots you and your opponents are going to take which actions. And then each player starts the game with a unique leader that has a special ability on it. And you also have these advisor cards that you can purchase, and the advisors will give you unique special abilities that are completely different than your opponents as well. And so there is quite a lot of moving parts with trying to gain these different special abilities to give yourself better actions at certain things than your opponents, which comes into part of the reason why it's such a tough game to remember the rules for, because there's a lot going on with that side of it, but it's also paired with just simple worker placement for the main part of the board. So there's got that balance, like I said, where once you learn the game and you've played it a couple times, it comes back to you pretty quickly, but it's also a more difficult game to introduce to new gamers. But if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out The Great Wall. All right, to my number 46 game was number 42 last year, staying strong in the 40s. This game has jumped on and off the top 50 favorite games of all time list throughout the years, but it definitely ends up finding its way back to the list every so often. And that's just because every time I get it to the table, it reinvigorates how much I enjoy the game and remember enjoying the game, even though it's one of the very first games I ever purchased into my collection. And this game is Dominion. Got to move some of these other boxes out of the way to make room, as we are not having as much table space here. But Dominion is the classic grandfather to deck building. That's pretty much all it is. If you know the deck building mechanism that has been integrated into other games more recently or within the last 5 or 10 years, then you are already familiar with pretty much the game Dominion. In Dominion, there's nothing else fancy about it. There's no additional fluff to the game. There's no boards or moving pieces. It is just simply decks of cards in the center of the table that you are purchasing for different abilities to bring them into your discard pile, reshuffle them into your deck, and then draw them as you draw new hands of cards throughout the game. And you are trying to create this engine of cards with different actions and different buy abilities and different amounts of gold or silver or copper to purchase new cards. And the fun thing in Dominion that's really fun is creating those combos and how each deck of cards that you build feels specific to you and to your plan and your strategic plan of action, that compared to your opponents, they're building their decks in completely different ways from you, and you are just trying to strategize in your head and purchase cards to your deck that'll work well together to then eventually ramp itself into mid-game, more mid to late game, as you start using your money to purchase victory point cards, which will then go into your discard pile and be shuffled into your deck as well. And you don't necessarily want to do that too early in the game, which is another fun thing about Dominion, is if you do purchase those victory point cards to your deck too early, then those cards are completely pointless, don't give you any new actions or any money at all. It just kind of clogs up your deck and then eventually starts clogging up your hand of cards, so then you have less and less actions to play on your turn. So you really have to balance when you're going to buy victory point cards at what point in the game, along with also building up your engine of cards. So Dominion, a classic example of how great and streamlined deck building can be, and it just never gets old. Super simple to teach, very simple to play, and hasn't failed me since I bought it back in 2010, I think is when I first got it. So that is Dominion. All right, my game number 45 was actually number 60 last year. So it was 10 spots off of the top 50. It did not even make any of the videos at all, but it's another game that when I think about it more, and it brings me back to when I first played the game, how much I enjoy it, and also adding in the expansion for it pretty much right away after we first got the game, we added in the expansion, and that, in my honest opinion, I think the expansion is essential to make this game as great as it is. But every time I think about it, I do think about putting it on my top 50 game list every year, and then this year it finally made the cut. But it's another nice, simple worker placement game set in the D&D universe, and that is Lords of Waterdeep. Like I said, this game is another simple worker placement game where you are sending out your agents to different spots on the board to gather resources, but the resources in this game are actually different types of figures like wizards or warriors, rogue figures. You're trying to essentially recruit troops. The resources are essentially troops to then go out and try to go off on quests, and depending on which quests you can complete with the figures you've recruited, those will give you victory points. At the end of a set number of rounds, whoever has the most victory points is the winner. Really like how simple and streamlined this game is. It's a lot of fun because you can really block your opponents out of locations that they really needed to go to. So there's a lot of trying to second guess what people are going to do and try to get to locations before they do, and really trying to prioritize which agents you're sending where first. So that's kind of the bread and the butter to this game, is really that kind of boxing your opponents out of the locations. And then also there is a spot where you can get intrigue cards in this game, and the intrigue cards throw a huge loop and a curveball into the whole mix of things, where those will give you basically one-time special actions that you can play a card, you can do a special thing to really interrupt the normal stream of play and what everybody's planning to do. It really throws a whole wrench in the system, so the intrigue cards really shine in this game. And then the other thing I really like about Lords of Waterdeep that not a whole lot of other worker placement games have ever done is that there's a location where you can buy buildings, and the buildings come on a tile, and you can place those tiles on the board to give a unique worker placement action to that tile. So you're essentially adding more more locations to the board that you can send your agents to. And if other opponents use your location or your building that you built, you also get a reward for them using your building. It sounds more complex than it really is. You're just sending those agents out to gather various things, but the intrigue cards and the building of the buildings, trying to get to spots before your opponents to try to complete your quests is a whole lot of fun. And the more I think about it, the more I do think Lords of Waterdeep deserves a spot on my top 50 favorite games of all time. All right, to my number 44 game was number 27 last year. So again, dropping quite significantly simply because it just doesn't see a ton of table time anymore because we've just played the heck out of it. We've played this game so much. Actually, got to get some of these games out of my way here, otherwise you won't be able to see me here sooner or later. But yeah, this game that I'm about to talk about here is one of my favorite tile placement games of all time. Definitely one I'd recommend to families or new gamers, and also hardcore gamers all in the like. This game never falls flat and is a joy to play every time, and it is Queendomino. Queendomino, again, another game that's been around quite a bit. Very simple game to, again, teach and learn and play, but it has a lot of strategic depth to it. In Queendomino, as you can see here, there are different domino tiles that have two sides to them. What's fun and unique about Queendomino is that it's not so much even the puzzle or the pattern building of the tiles in front of you, but it also has a really cool drafting system in this game, where at the beginning of each round, the tiles are ordered from top to bottom, with the weakest tile being at the top and the strongest tile being at the bottom, because each of the backs of the tiles have a number on them. And the higher the number is, the stronger the tile is. So you are kind of, deciding to either put your worker on either a higher up tile so you can go earlier next round, or maybe a lower tile to get a better action on the tile by placing it lower on the list, but then you risk, going later in the round for the next round, so you might get stuck with an even worse tile for the next round. So it has a lot of balancing to this game with the whole drafting mechanism in it. And then also you're just, the other part of it is you are placing out your tiles in front of you in a 5x5 grid. You can't go outside of that 5x5 grid, so it's essentially kind of a small area, but you're trying to connect the same colors to one another to build out these regions of different colors. There are certain tiles that have a crown symbol on them, and essentially the way the scoring works is that you count how many tiles of a specific color are in a region. Let's say, for an example, you've connected 7 blue tiles, and then you count how many crowns are on each of those blue tiles. You might only have maybe 2 crowns in that entire region of 7, so you take the 2 crowns times the region of 7 for 14 victory points. So it's just simple math at the end of the game. And in Queendomino versus the simpler game of Kingdomino, Queendomino also adds the red tiles that you can draft onto your player board, and then those will essentially allow you to purchase other red tiles from the sideboard to give you better and stronger ways to score victory points. So if you like tile placement and you haven't played Queendomino yet, I would definitely go and pick this one up. All right, my number 43 game was number 36 last year, so just dropping slightly, kind of like a lot of the other games here, and it's solely for the reason that I don't get it tabled a lot. Us being a board game review channel, we get a lot of new games that are coming in that we need to get played and reviewed and kind of feature here on the channel, and this is just another game that's kind of slipped because we haven't been able to get to the table a lot, and this game is Merv, the Heart of the Silk Road. So move Queendomino here out of the way as the pile stacks up. And Merv, Heart of the Silk Road, it is a dry Euro game through and through. What I really like about Merv is its complexity with essentially the way you're moving your worker around a rondel. It has a square board here in the center of the board. You get one worker that you are traveling along the different 4 corners of the square in the center of the map. Each time you stop your worker on a location, you have the option to build a house and or trigger an action in that column or in the row that you finish placing your worker onto. Each time you're moving your worker, you must stop on one side of the square board, and then as you jump to the next side, you get to then trigger a row, and then you move on to the next side of the square, triggering a column, and you basically just keep going around in that fashion as you play the game. Like I said, there's a lot of strategic options in this game with where to finish placing your worker, which spots to block from your opponents. Building a house on a location can also start helping you combo into triggering multiple actions with each time you place a worker on that location in the future. So I like the aspect of kind of building up into these different combos throughout the game to build up your actions, and also trying to pay attention to what your opponents are doing to block them from doing specific actions or specific areas that might block you from getting a better combo. You also have like 3 or 4 different tracks around the main board that you're trying to go up on to get different benefits and victory points from those, and the game plays smoothly and pretty quickly as well. It says here on the box that it plays in 90 minutes. For a dry Euro, it definitely has a lot of player interaction and blocking your opponents from different locations. So that is Merv. All right, my game number 42 was number 44 last year, so staying pretty strong in its same location essentially, and it's one of my favorite Alexander Pfister games of all time. Not my favorite. I have, spoilers, multiple Alexander Pfister games on my list because I just adore his designs, but this is definitely one of them that, again, I wish would hit the table more often, and just doesn't see a ton of play, but I really think this might climb in the future the more often I get it tabled. So this is Blackout Hong Kong. Blackout Hong Kong, like Alexander Pfister likes to do in a lot of his games, it is multi-use cards. Each card that you're playing can do various things, and essentially it's got some area control to this game where you're trying to send out different pieces to regions to control that area for victory points. The larger the region that you can control gains you access to even larger amounts of victory points to try to win the game. The different card use in this game is just fantastic, and the way that the card actions actually work in this game is a really fun and unique mechanism as well, and it kind of borrows some mechanisms from one of his earlier designs in Mombasa, but in Blackout Hong Kong, kind of similar. You have columns of cards that every time you play a card, you have to play it on top of one of the previous columns you've already played, and then depending on where you played the card, that'll then tell you which pile of cards you'll pick up back to your hand to be able to use in the future. Essentially, the way that works is at the end of each round, whichever column of cards has the most cards in it are the cards that you're recalling back to your hand. But what's really fun in Blackout Hong Kong is that you also want to try to put cards that are valuable to you and to your actions into columns that don't have a lot of cards, because the longer they stay in play, you can keep gaining the benefit from that card as long as it stays in play. But like I said, as soon as those cards become a part of the column with the most cards in it, you have to recall it back to your hand. You have no option at that. So it's a really cool puzzle with that, a really cool mechanism. You also have these mission cards that are really fun to try to complete these unique missions around the board that are unique to you from what your opponents are trying to do to get victory points also in different ways. And then I also like the aspect that your cards can actually become injured, or your characters that you're trying to send out into the Hong Kong, essentially during the blackout, you're trying to go out and help others, which is kind of the theme behind this. You're trying to help others during this blackout period, and they can actually become injured as they're going out to try to help others, and they're sent to the hospital, is also a unique component to this game. So definitely love Blackout Hong Kong. It isn't talked about a whole lot anymore, but definitely I think one of Alexander Pfister's more underrated designs. Okay, and the last game on my list here for today is my number 41, and it was number 41 last year as well. So staying in the exact same spot, I just got the first expansion for this game, have not gotten it played yet, but it introduces some more tracks and another player that can join the game as well. And this game is Heat Pedal to the Metal. One of, if not my favorite racing game of all time. It's not really deck building per se, unless you're playing with the garage mode where you can build cards into your starting deck that's unique from your opponents. So if you're playing with that garage mode, it is some deck building before the game begins, but it's really more of hand management and deck management, because you are trying to balance the cards you're playing from your engine with when to play heat cards to your engine as well. Because if you play too many heat cards, your engine essentially overheats, and then you can't utilize the heat for turbos or trying to speed your car along the track more effectively. So you really need to manage the cards you're playing with the heat cards you're playing to add to your engine at specific times. And also in classic car racing fashion that I really enjoy in this, and that's a lot of fun, is that you are trying to take the tight corners effectively as well. So in the straightaways, you are shifting into a higher gear to try to go faster and just kind of turbo along and speed along down the track, but you have to be careful and you have to downshift and get into a lower gear to take those tight corners effectively, because if you can't, you run the risk of spinning out and then going back to the start of that corner. And then essentially, if your opponents are taking the corner better than you, they can whip around you and take the corner and keep on moving along, and you spun out and have to kind of wait behind to then regain some speed with your car. So it's really fun. It definitely feels very thematic. It's one of those racing games that actually does feel like you are racing, and you're manipulating your own engine that feels unique to how your opponents are playing the game too. So I really enjoy Heat as one of my favorite. I don't want to spoil anything. It could be my favorite, might be my favorite, but definitely one of my favorite racing games of all time. All right, and that does it for today's list. The first list in my top 50 favorite games of all time, 50 up to 41. Stay tuned for future lists as I get closer and closer to my top 10 favorite games of all time. And like in previous years, stay tuned for which members of Talking Cardboard might be involved in their top 20, or maybe for sure their top 10 favorite games, as they join me to the table for that. So I'm really excited as we work our way up to the top 10 to show you all what I have to bring. As always, if you enjoy what you see here on the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps us out a lot. And leave in the comments below what are some of your favorite board games of all time. Until next time, you all have a great day and have fun gaming.